Return by G. Pendarves. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Dale Grothman. The Return by G. Pendarves. Might spend a night in many worse places than this, said Arnold Drysdale to himself as his host disappeared, leaving him alone in the great vaulted room, lit by the dancing flicker of a log fire. The portraits on the paneled walls were veiled by a shadowy darkness, but beyond the circle of radiance within which Drysdale sat could be seen the dim outline of the Bechstein Grand, the huddle of chairs at the far end of the music room, the pale glimmer of flowers in tall vases, and the clouded splendor of the gold brocade curtains drawn across the windows. "Yes, it's a very easy way of earning £5, went on Drysdale reflectively, lounging back in his chair and lighting a cigarette. "And what's more, I believe it's done the trick with Millicent." He chuckled complacently. "She thinks I'm no end of a hero to take on the wager and spend a night in a haunted room." His lazy brown eyes half closed as he thought of Millicent Fane, her youth, her loveliness, her dawning love for himself, and above all, her wealth. Nothing like a misspent youth for teaching a man the sort of woman he ought to marry, he concluded. Discrimination is better than innocence, and experience than much fine love. He looked round sharply as the far door of the room opened, and a man's tall figure showed for an instant against the lighted corridor without, before the door was closed again, and the intruder approached. "That you, Holbrook?" said Drysdale, thinking his host had returned to add a word of warning or advice. "Come back to see me hobnobbing with your spectral friend, eh?" "It's not Holbrook. It's I, Jim McCurdy." "What?" Drysdale sprang to his feet. "Why, where? How?" "I wasn't sure if I could get here tonight, so I did not let Holbrook know I was coming. Thought I'd just give you a surprise." "Surprise?" echoed Drysdale faintly, his hands clenched so that the knuckles gleamed. His cigarette dropped from the suddenly relaxed lips to the rug at his feet. Jim McCurdy sat down at the table and looked across at his companion with a grin. "I heard you were at your old game of playing hero," he said, "and I thought it was a good opportunity of finding you alone. I've wanted this little chat with you for the last 8 years." "Then you you came back after all from that expedition?" "Yes, I came back after all. We're pretty tough, we McCurdys, and there were several good reasons for my getting back. It's a bit too late for doing all I meant to do, but there's still one thing." A silence fell. The shadows in the big room seemed to thrust forward, to peer and listen, as Drysdale sank into his chair and looked at his old rival opposite him, incredibly aged and altered from the gay, carefree youth whom Drysdale had sent on that deadly mission 8 years ago. "Then the ambush?" Drysdale bit back his words too late. Against his will, the fatal question had shaped itself into words. "Ah, yes, the ambush. You knew all about the ambush, didn't you? You urged me and my men to take that particular route across the desert, knowing that Ibn Said and his ruffians waited by the well of Tiz for us. You cowardly, lying thief." The last deliberately spoken words bit like ice into Drysdale's consciousness, and partly settled his swirling thoughts. "Thief?" he stuttered. "Thief?" "Thief. One who steals what belongs to another man," explained McCurdy, leaning forward until his eyes blazed like points of blue flame into those of his companion. Drysdale's gaze fell before them, and he half rose from his seat. "Sit still," ordered McCurdy. I've come a long way for the pleasure of meeting you once more, and now you're going to listen." "Don't make a fool of yourself," sneered Drysdale, his confidence returning as he began to adjust himself to the situation. "Thief, you call me?" He shrugged his shoulders. "Jean Kennedy was quite ready to be stolen, if that's what you mean." "You tricked her and lied to her and deceived her. You left her to die miserably, as you left me." "That's your own rotten imagination at work," answered Drysdale. "She went abroad a year after you, disappeared. No one ever heard what became of her. She went to Bruges. She lived at a mean little inn called Chat de Gris, and died there when her son, and yours, was born." Drysdale stared back, his nonchalance again stripped from him. "How the devil did you—" McCurdy's lean brown hands toyed with the matchbox on the table. "I know where she lies buried in a pauper's graveyard down by the river. She and her nameless son. I know that you stopped her allowance when her reproaches annoyed you, and that she became a wretched, half-starved slave to the innkeeper, Père Gozart, and his drunken wife." "Damn you, you paid them to tell you this fairy tale," blustered Drysdale. "I have never spoken to them in my life," was the answer. "Liar! No one else in the world could know that that—" "So you corroborate the story?" "No, curse you, I don't!" shouted Drysdale, getting to his feet. "You've found them out by accident and concocted this tale to try to ruin me. Before you ruin Millicent Fay as a climax to your varied career." Drysdale's angry face changed. The red faded, and ugly, unexpected lines appeared round his mouth. His brown eyes were suddenly hard and calculating. "So that's your little game," he said at last. "We're rivals once more. I did not know that you had ever met Millicent," he went on. "You're going to try to use my guilty past as a weapon. Very neat. I see, I see." And turning to the whiskey and soda which sat on the table, he began to fill his glass. For a moment the other man sat very still, looking steadily at Drysdale. Then, pushing back his chair, he got up and stood with his back to the glowing fire, his thin brown hands clasped behind him. "I thought that even you would see such an obvious thing," McCurdy rejoined at last. "You'll leave here tonight. Now, in fact." All the baffling, violent emotions that had possessed Drysdale during the last few minutes boiled up suddenly within him, his interlocutor's words of easy command setting a match to his fury. With a swift, uncontrolled movement, he hurled the glass he held, striking McCurdy full in the face. There was a sharp hissing sound as the liquid splattered on the hot tiles of the hearth, and the glass shivered against the mantelpiece a few feet behind McCurdy's head. "Good God!" Drysdale's voice was a mere thread of sound, as the eyes of the other man continued to look steadfastly into his own. "What are you?" "I am Jim McCurdy, whom you sent to death 8 years ago in the desert of Thalat." Drysdale gasped and held on to the back of a chair, while the familiar surroundings of the music room receded to vast distances, and a swimming darkness enveloped him. Then, slowly, reason asserted itself. How absurd of him to think, even for a moment, that the glass had passed through McCurdy's head. It was merely the effect of the firelight and his own jangled nerves. "It appears you did not die in spite of my efforts," he answered, with a barely perceptible tremor in his voice. "I was buried at the wells of Tiz, with 6 spear wounds through my body." Drysdale looked stunned for a moment, but a lifelong habit of disbelieving what he did not understand conquered his rising fears. "Either you're Jim McCurdy or his double. In any case, you're making a nuisance of yourself, he said finally, and drawing an automatic from his pocket, he leveled it at his companion, who had moved until he stood with his back to the paneled wall at the right of the fireplace. I'm going to shoot you. If you did not die in the desert, you'll die here and now. I shall say I thought you were the ghost that haunts this room. I am the ghost, replied McCurdy. I have waited 8 years to get back again, and tonight gave me my entrance to the world of humans once more. In this room there is power I could adapt to my needs, power to materialize, to borrow for a brief time a visible human garment for my soul. Splendid, answered Drysdale with a sneering laugh. You always had a powerful imagination, McCurdy. Well, I'm going to deprive you of your garment once and for all. He raised his arm, and a shot rang out. But the tall figure stood motionless before him, the blue eyes steady on his own. Curse it, muttered Drysdale. This light! He fired again, and yet again. Die, can't you? He shrieked, stumbling up close to the quiet figure, and putting the muzzle of his weapon to its breast, he fired one shot after another in rapid succession, then fell with a wild yell of laughter to the ground, the smoking revolver clenched in his fingers. Holbrook was the first to find him lying there, and hastily dropped his handkerchief over that agonized, grinning face before the startled guests and servants poured into the room. The paneled wall to the right of the fireplace was riddled with bullets, but no sign of blood. No foot nor fingerprint of any assailant did the keenest man from Scotland Yard ever discover. What or whom Drysdale had tried to shoot was never known, for the dead cannot speak, or if they do, they are not believed. The end of The Return by G. Pendarves.
Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.